right, everybody. I got another very special guest for everyone today. I want you all to welcome to the show Jim Mahfood. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I always appreciate anyone coming on the show and taking time to chat, so I appreciate you. Jim, you've had in doing my research on you, you're one of those creators who came on my radar with Girl Scouts recently, but then I started looking back, and you've actually somebody who I've read a bunch of your stuff, not realizing it when I was younger. So you kind of hit things culturally along the way for me personally, which is always a fun part of the show when I realize that. But before we get too much into some of that stuff, I want to start you off where we start most of our new guests. What's your origin story? Like, what got you into comics, and then at what point were you like, hey, I could draw these things and create these things?
Yeah, I grew up in St. Louis in the Midwest, and I just became fascinated with comic books at an early age. I sort of discovered them early on through like seeing stuff in the Sunday paper, the actual comic strips, and then going to the grocery store with my mom every week. Like I saw my first like magazine rack that had actual comic books, and being a kid born in the 70s, I knew Spider-Man from the PBS show, The Electric Company. And I also knew like Spider-Man, the 60s cartoon was in reruns on TV, and the Batman 60s show was also in reruns. So I sort of, and Super Friends was on TV as well. So like I knew what superhero characters were, and once I connected the dots that these characters were starring in these things called comic books, I started buying the comic books. Or rather, my mom started buying them for me. So I would go once a week to the store with her and help her out, like go shopping for the whole family. And as a reward at the end, when she'd be checking out, she'd be like, hey, go grab a couple comics. And I'd run to the rack and grab, whatever Spidey comics I could find, or G.I. Joe at the time. This is like, 80s, or Batman. I mean, those were sort of my go-tos. So it started a lifelong obsession, man. And I mean, I had always been drawing since I was a kid. And then I started really focusing on drawing as a potential career, probably in like junior high, when people in my school started telling me, hey, you're pretty good. Like, you're pretty good at drawing. So it kind of started resonating with me, like, oh, this is something that makes me stand out. And in 7th or 8th grade, I had a couple of the popular girls ask me for drawings. And it was my way of talking to like the popular girls. And that also was a moment of, oh, this is how I can meet girls. Like I have something that it's like in Napoleon Dynamite where he's like, girls like guys with skills or whatever. It's like, if you have a skill and you can stand out, I mean, you can use that, to meet people and kind of break the ice. And I was pretty shy, I guess. So that just kind of started me on this path. And then in St. Louis in high school, I met these cats that were self-publishing their own comic books, and their company was called Artline Studios, and they were doing early 90s black and white self-published stuff. And they wound up hiring me basically when I was like 15, 16 as their assistant office kid apprentice background inker. So that kind of taught me the ropes of how comics were done. And then after high school, I went to art school in Kansas City. And I started self-publishing my own comics. That's where Girl Scouts was created. A bunch of my stuff that a lot of it it's still kind of with me to this day. And I also met and became roommates with Mike Huddleston and Nathan Fox, who are both absolutely incredible artists, professionals working today, right now in comics and in illustration. So the three of us kind of came up together in school, and then through these self-published books, I got discovered by Marvel in 1996 and scored this gig doing this really weird book called Generation X Underground Special for Marvel. Started working on it in 97. Went to San Diego that year, met Kevin Smith, met Bob Schreck, who had just formed Oni Press, scored the gig illustrating Kevin's first Clerks comic, and then Clerks came out, and then Gen X Underground came out right after that, and that was the launching pad of my entire career as an artist. So from 97 on, man, I never had to work like a day job again. I went full force with being a freelance comic artist and illustrator.
That's the dream right there.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a good place to start, because my timeline might be a little muddy, but we'll jump around to a few cool things along the way. And I mean, let's start with Clerks, because that's kind of one of those things I mentioned earlier, where I'm a huge Kevin Smith fan, have been since I was probably way too young to be watching his movies, and
right.
He was one of those things for me that was like, oh, these comic book things, along with Batman animated series and all the cartoons from my childhood. So what was it like jumping into that world and that kind of being your launching point? Because that's quite the fan base that you're jumping in with as well.
Oh yeah, it was huge. I mean, I was a big fan of Kevin's work. Someone screened Clerks when it came out when we were all still in college, and someone screened it at our campus in like the photo video department one night, and the legend was like, oh, this dude from New Jersey just made this movie on like $27,000 budget. He sold part of his comic book collection. He maxed out credit cards. And all of us as DIY starving artists at the time were like, oh, holy shit. And then, we watched the movie. There's Star Wars references and all this great stuff. And I was immediately a fan. So Mallrats came out, and then Chasing Amy came out, and then Kevin was riding high because Chasing Amy was a success. So when he was at San Diego in 97, he was still like touring and promoting Chasing Amy. So I caught him and his whole crew, the whole View Askew crew, like Scott Mosier, all his homies. Walt Flanagan was there, Brian Johnson was there, and it was just like an immediate connection with those dudes, because they were 5 or 6 years older than me, but they all reminded me of the dudes I hung out with in high school. So it was kind of an instant thing. And then Bob Schreck helped really solidify this together of convincing Kevin, like, hey, I think we should go with this new kid. Like, this kid is hot. He's got a really bugged out, unique style. Instead of going with like an established mainstream name, your name, Kevin, is going to sell the book. We're going to get the eyes on this thing anyway. It's going to move anyway. Let's make it even more of a unique piece by signing an unknown talent to it. Because Kevin originally his dream was to have Joe Quesada. He wanted Joe to draw the book, and Bob sort of had to convince him, like, no, we don't want like a mainstream guy. We want like, this is Clerks. It's black and white. It's indie. We want like a DIY, like indie feel. So I had to after meeting them in San Diego, I went back home and they sent me a big old box of like photo reference, photo stills from all of Kevin's movies. So I started doing sketches of all the Clerks characters and faxing them to Kevin. And that's kind of what I think convinced him, because he was like, oh, okay, this is what we want, And I mean, dude, obviously it was a huge thrill because he was an established personality already. So to go from writing, drawing, lettering my own X-Men one-shot to now I'm working with this really hot director who's just had a big indie success, And now he's going into the field of comics, and I'm illustrating his first full blown feature length comic book. It's a pretty big deal. Like it was awesome. I mean, I was extremely excited and also nervous because I was like, oh shit, I can't mess this up. So I didn't tell Bob or Kevin that like I had never worked from a script before. Like I had never worked from anyone else's writing before. So when I got Kevin's script, I mean, I had to like really go through it and read it several times and figure out like, how am I going to pull this off? Like it's not impossible, but it's just like, oh shit, okay, this is not, I have to figure out how to, make this happen. So I think I pulled it off. I was fueled by fear, but also pure youthful ignorance and adrenaline,
I think that's one of my oldest trades I own is like the big Clerks. Like basically, it's the View Universe Oni Press collection. It's got Clerks and then Bluntman and Chronic in it and all that stuff. So your stuff, yeah. Do you know off the top of your head, was this after he was doing Daredevil? Is that why like Joe Quesada was the big name for him?
This was before Daredevil. Kevin, even though he was a fan of like Mage and Matt Wagner and Mike Allred and Madman, he was also, a full-blown superhero fanboy. So he was a fan of Joe's like X Factor work. And if you remember at the beginning title credits of Mallrats, he commissioned all these comic book artists to do fake comic book covers.
Yes.
And Joe Quesada did one of them. So he had already known Joe, and I mean, he was already friendly with lots of people in the comic book industry, and I just think that Joe was his favorite artist, which I don't blame him. Like, Joe's stuff was super badass, especially during that period. So, it was, I understand him wanting to work with Joe, but, luckily Bob was kind of like, no, we want an indie sensibility. And then once Kevin got to go over to Marvel and do the Marvel Knight stuff, Daredevil, I mean, it was a no-brainer that Joe would illustrate it.
Yeah, and it seems to me like the cooler heads prevailed because as much as I love Joe as well, like that's a weird choice for a Clerks comic. Like, he's very much the tights and spandex kind of artist, and even some of his like Valiant stuff, I don't connect it with that style. So he definitely made the right choice in going that way because the book, your style kind of fits what he was doing a lot better. And yeah, like he's an indie dude. Like, bring in the indie guys, bring someone new up. I love that idea. So it's a cool way to start your career there.
Yeah, I was really fortunate that Joe, and I'll also mention Bob. I'm sorry, I mentioned that Bob and also his partner, this guy Joe Nosmak. Joe and Bob formed Oni Press together. Joe was kind of like the business money guy, and Bob was the creative art director, editor-in-chief. But both Bob and Joe went to bat for me and helped convince Kevin, like, listen, dude, Clerks is like a DIY, low-budget movie, like, that's just held together with paper clips and rubber bands in a way. It's like, you want an art style, like nothing against my work, but they're like, you want an art style that has almost this like 90s black and white zine underground feel. And I think them explaining it to Kevin that way and then him seeing my sketches, that was like, he fully got it. And then he was fully on board and cheerleaded my whole collaboration with him. So yeah, it was great, dude. And being able to, the book came out, being able to do signings with him. I mean, I did signings with him where we'd be at a Comic-Con or a shop and there'd be like a line out the store and like down the block. And of course, I'm just there for the ride. Like, I know everyone's there to see Kevin, of course, but just to be sitting next to him and be part of it. I was 22 years old at the time, and I was just like, this is a trip that this is happening. Like, this is crazy shit. And it was just, and then afterwards I'd go like party with Jay or what, like, Jason Mewes would be around, and he was still, not sober during that era. And we would get into a bunch of trouble and have fun. And it was a really special and amazing time, like lightning in a bottle type shit that you couldn't recreate if you tried.
Well, and I like the parallel because it fits too. Like that's how Kevin started his career, and for him to kind of pass it on to you as a way to start your career is fitting, especially with Clerks of all things. Like it's just that's an amazing story for him to kind of, even if he kind of had to be coerced a little bit, to pass that along to a newbie, to a young kid who was trying to get in, and to bring him to the same spot that Kevin got in his early days. So
definitely
cool stuff. I love that. And then, so yeah, you said you did the one shot at Marvel. We'll talk a tiny bit about Marvel because you do enter a world that is very special to me in Marvel. And eventually you get over to the Ultimates line, which is the part of Marvel for me that was really special. In my like late teenage years in the 20s, I really like connected with Ultimates. How was your whole Marvel experience, and what was it like with the Ultimates line altogether?
Oh, it was great because we were all allowed to come in through Brian Michael Bendis and his success there. So, I mean, I met Brian when he was still doing indie stuff before he became like a Marvel superstar. So I knew him as a guy originally doing, indie comics. So when he became successful and he got that first title of the Ultimate Marvel Team Up, and kind of convinced Marvel, like, this is the book where we're going to like experiment and let all my weirdo friends come in and draw each individual issue as a different artist. So we had already been talking a little bit, and then he contacted me and was kind of like, hey, I have you in mind for a couple different things I want to do, but I think what I really want to do, and this was not what I was expecting at all. I thought it was going to be like Ghost Rider or something strange, like a more obscure team up with Spidey, like Man Thing, something weird. And he's like, I want to do Fantastic Four with you, and we're going to do like a straight Mad Magazine style comedy issue where we break the fourth wall and Spidey and the Skrulls are like fighting in the Marvel offices, and like all the editors are going to be in it. I'm going to be in it. You're going to be in it. Joe Quesada's going to be in it. And I was like, oh shit. Okay. Well, yeah, this sounds great. So, it was, and it was fun as hell, man. And, we worked with Ralph Macchio, the famous, Spider-Man editor, famous Marvel editor. And, to me, I had been seeing his name in Marvel Comics since I was a kid. So it was so surreal to like talk to him on the phone and hear a voice attached to it. Like, oh, this, to me, he was like super famous. It was just crazy. And it's also cool, man, because like back then, the publishers would send you the Bristol board to draw on. So, you establish your contract, you get a FedEx box from Marvel of the Marvel paper with like the logo and blue at the top, non-photo blue. And you're sitting down and you're penciling on Marvel paper with a Brian Michael Bendis script in front of you. And it's just badass. It's awesome. And Brian at the time, one really distinct memory I have is we were both on a night schedule at this time. Like I'd stay up all night and draw, and he would call me at like midnight or 1 a.m. when his, I guess, wife and family were asleep. He's always been a night worker, and he'd just be like, hey dude, let's talk about like some of these pages. And, I got some ideas. And so it was just really cool to know like the rest of the city's asleep and we're up, two weirdos talking about like comic books and making the Spider-Man issue that we're going to make. It was just like really exciting, cool shit. And, I had a blast doing it, and there was no like real interference from Marvel. It was sort of like do the pages, pencil them, send them in, have them lettered, get them back, ink it, move on to the next thing. So, but yeah, I mean, I grew up being a Marvel fanatic, so to actually get paid to draw Spider-Man, completely surreal experience. So, and then for a couple years after that book, I kind of became this go-to guy that Marvel would hit me up to do occasional fill-in issues or 2-issue series on like Peter Parker, Spectacular Spider-Man, or Tangled Web. Basically anything that was weird and comedy related. Marvel started hitting me up to do that kind of stuff. And it was mostly just from like, you know, Brian getting me in, and I started working with Axel Alonso as the editor on those books, and Axel's super cool guy, a friend of mine to this day, and a guy that I could talk to about like the real mechanics of doing comics, making comics, storytelling. You know, some editors are really hands off, and other editors are like, they really want to talk to you about the process and give you notes. And Axel was one of the guys that really gave me good notes. So
he's one of those guys for you that maybe like helped you grow a little bit because his notes were actually constructive in a way. Is that how you'd explain it?
Yeah, definitely. Like him and Bob Schreck, when I was working on Clerks, Bob would do the same, where he'd be like, hey, as far as storytelling goes, think about maybe adding this kind of panel or shooting it from this angle, or, you know, I was just still so new to the science of storytelling in comics that it's good to have an experienced outside eye sometimes come in and say, this isn't terrible, but maybe think about it from a different point of view. You know, I think sometimes artists, like, we're always on deadline and sometimes in a hurry, that you sometimes just dash out your first thing, your gut instinct, and then you turn that in. And sometimes it helps a lot to play around and figure out other options. And a good editor will let you know, hey, maybe think about this a different way, you know. So I got that. I got that help early on, and it definitely benefited me, I think.
Yeah, it kind of help you learn your framing and all that, all the technical stuff that most artists don't really think about it. Like, yeah, you're kind of a director of photography when you think about it, just as much as an artist.
Yeah, that's why comics is like the most labor-intensive visual art. Is not only do you have to know how to draw anything that the script requires, you have to know storytelling, pacing, perspective, mood, lighting. All these things come into an effect to, you know, guide the viewer into the reality you're trying to create. So if something goes wrong, if you send a mixed signal, you're interrupting the reader's enjoyment of digesting this story. So it's an interesting science, man. I mean, it really is like figuring out all these steps and putting it together. It's all just problem solving, really. I mean, that's what it boils down to.
Like most things in life.
Yes. Yeah.
So you do your stint at Marvel. You know, we could go book by book, but like you said, you did a bunch of like 2-issue things, fill in stuff throughout it. At what point did you jump into like Image and or the indie scene, the big time indie scene, or whatever you want to call it, and start doing books like Girl Scouts?
Yeah, after Clerks, I started doing creator-owned stuff at Oni. I did my first Girl Scout series at Oni, and then Bob Schreck left Oni to become editor-in-chief of the Batman line at DC. So once Bob left, I sort of left as well. So I took all my creator-owned stuff over to Image around 2001. when Jim Valentino was still there as head publisher. And Valentino is an indie guy. Like, even though he did Shadowhawk and Guardians of the Galaxy and stuff, he started off doing indie comics and self-publishing with Normal Man and that kind of stuff. So him and I immediately hit it off, and he welcomed me over to Image. So I started doing Stupid Comics and then Girl Scouts and a whole bunch of other books over the last 20 years. Image has sort of been my main home for my creator-owned stuff. And I have a really good relationship with them where they basically, I'll pitch them what I want to do, and once they greenlight it, they sort of just let me do the work and turn it in finished. So there's not really much editorial control. It's more like, hey, we trust you. Hopefully you know what you're doing. Make the cool thing you want to make, and then we'll put it out there for you. So
are most cool. Are most of those books you working by yourself, or have you had a lot of collaborators? I can't say that word apparently along the way.
It's a difficult word. Yeah. I most of the stuff I'm writing and drawing myself, and then my buddy Justin Stewart, who's based in Kentucky, he was my colorist for many, many years, and even lettered a bunch of my stuff as well. So it wasn't until recently with the last Girl Scout series I just did, it's called Girl Scout Stone Ghost. That was the first one that I actually colored myself as well. So I did the writing, the art, the lettering, and the coloring. So I've kind of incorporated digital coloring into the bag of tricks that I'm using for my work right now. And I'm doing this thing now, man, where I'm sort of just like this one-man machine of, I just want to have control over literally every aspect of the product. You know, even boiling down to like, what papers is it going to get printed on? How is it presented? That way, if something goes wrong, like, you really don't have anyone to blame. It's just all on you. And it forces me to be a bit more sharp and attentive to like what I want to do. So that being said, I mean, I'm not ever opposed to collaborating, and Justin and I still work together on different things, and he designs stuff for me, and he's awesome. It's just one of those things of whatever the project calls for. That's kind of what I do is just follow my gut and be like, well, I'm going to just do this one on my own or whatever. So it helps to know like what direction you want to go in with each project, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. And something you said there made me think of this from an artist's perspective, from, you know, what you do. How important is the paper quality at the end of it, and like the different types of paper that a book is printed on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. All of it matters to me because most people are not going to see your original art or how the material looks on your screen of your computer. They're only going to see it through the printed book that they wind up buying. So that printed version, man, is really what the world is going to perceive of your work. So if you get a shitty print job or bad paper or bad presentation, that's how the world is consuming what you do. So luckily, I mean, we live in an age right now of like, digital printing is so sophisticated and fantastic that it's sort of hard to make a book that's printed poorly. Like, you really have to screw up and turn in like the wrong files or do the wrong, you know, DPI, do something horribly wrong. And it's cool because like at Image, my homegirl Trisha, shout out to Trisha Ramos, I turn in all my files and she goes through everything. She's like my production person, and she makes sure everything is ready. Everything's good to go. And it's going to look beautiful in print. Image gives the creators their decision on what kind of paper they want, like matte or glossy, that kind of thing. And so we do have a say in art directing and producing the final product. And honestly, man, like I haven't had a disappointing uh, situation with that to this date. So it's funny, even like getting flyers printed now from like a company you find on online. Just getting flyers printed, dude. If you send them the right, if you're not an idiot and send them the right file, you get flyers back, and it's like, wow, look at this printing. Like, I remember in the '90s doing our own handmade, like zines and shit like that, and it's just such a world of difference now of where we're at with printing. It's just we're in a really good space right now. Is what I guess what I'm trying to say. Like, it's kind of a golden era for presentation, printing, and how you want your work to be consumed by the people out there. It's cool.
And I can confirm, as one of those idiots, you can still be an idiot and get a good print job out of it. Because I've gotten stuff printed for the show and for other things in general, and they always come back, and I'm like, wow, I did a great job. I did nothing.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, some reliable person at the print shop was like, "This guy forgot to crop this, so I'm just gonna do it for him and assume that this is what he wants." So
and make him feel like a rock star, which successful job, guy at the print shop.
Yeah, thank you.
So before we jump into what you're working on right now, I gotta ask, because every time I look you up, this comes up. What's the deal with the Colt 45 ad?
Yeah, that was a great freelance gig that I scored in 2007 and 2008. I signed on with Colt 45, who are actually owned by PBR. I signed on to do their entire ad campaign for like 2 years. So it consisted of like 30 illustrations and one-page comics that were used in ads in like Vice magazine, on billboards, on the sides of beer trucks, as cardboard printed standees that were like in liquor stores. And then the ultimate, man, was I got 4 different designs printed on the actual beer cans themselves. So it was just this campaign that went for a couple of years, and it's still out there. I mean, you can still see this stuff, and it was just really funny because like Colt 45 wound up sponsoring all of our events for those 2 years. So if I did an art show anywhere in the country or a live art event anywhere in the country after a Comic-Con or any kind of after party, I would hit up Colt 45 and they would send beer to that location. So like a Colt 45 beer truck would show up at whatever venue or art gallery and just unload cases of free Colt 45. So, depending on what your taste is, malt liquor is an acquired taste. It's not for everyone, but who's going to complain about free product? You know what I mean? It's just, it was just funny because it's like we went full circle, man. Because in Kansas City, when we were poor art students, we drank 40 ounces of malt liquor because that's all we could afford. And then 20 years later, it's like I'm doing the ads for this malt liquor company, and now we're all drinking malt liquor again because why not? It's free at this event we're doing. So, but I discovered most adults can only drink 1 or 2 cans, and then you don't want to keep drinking malt liquor all night. Something bad might happen, or some fight might break out. I don't know. What I'm saying is it's a different kind of buzz. It's a different kind of buzz,
It's a young man's game.
Well put. Well put.
Did you ever see one of these trucks driving around? Were you ever like, oh my God, that's my thing on the truck over there?
I didn't see the trucks because I was living in LA at the time. We didn't get the trucks, but I had friends in Brooklyn, in New York, and friends in Chicago that saw the trucks and shot photos of them for me. But the thrilling thing, man, was in LA, there was 2 different billboards with my art on it. And One of them was on Hollywood Boulevard, right outside the world famous Henry Fonda Theater. So this is so crazy. My little brother was in town visiting, and we were at a bar down the street from the Henry Fonda called Cranes. And we were drinking and partying, and someone ran into the bar and ran up to me and grabbed me and was like, dude, your billboard is outside the Henry Fonda Theater right now. Colt 45. So I hadn't seen it yet. So we all like slammed our drinks and then ran out of the bar down the street and just were running down the street and saw the billboard. And it was cool because I was with my brother and him and I just like hugged each other. And he's like, dude, holy shit, look at that. It's like this ridiculously huge banner with my stuff on it. Pretty crazy, pretty fun. There's been stuff like that throughout my career, like besides just doing comics and getting published work. Like there's been things like that in my career that are kind of like standout moments, really fun, unexpected things that just kind of happen. That it's like the joy of freelance. It is a grind and it's very hard work, but there's also been these times where completely unexpected things have happened that I just like, wow, I could have not planned that in a million years. It's so cool that happened. So
yeah,
cool.
Browsing through your career, it does seem like from an outsider's point of view that you had these moments where it's just like, that seems like a cool thing to do. Let's do that. Is that like how it kind of went for you? Or were there ever times when you're like, well, I got to do the Colt 45 act because I got to make a rent, or, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I've done freelance gigs that I did not want to do because I needed the money, and it turns into work. It feels like a chore, and that isn't the best way to work. But at the same time, it's like being raised with like a blue collar work mentality in the Midwest. The fact that I'm sitting in a room, dude, at a drawing table drawing for a living, you can't complain really ever. You know what I mean? So it's like I could be digging ditches or whatever. And so even if something isn't enjoyable, it's like, yeah, but you're drawing as your job. So don't complain. Don't take it for granted. Like just plow through this and then move on to the next thing that will hopefully be fun. You know?
That's good to hear. So I guess to wrap everything up, we should talk about the new project. So you're returning to Girl Scouts, but this time with kind of a digital flavor to it. So I guess start by explaining the project and why you wanted to go back to Girl Scouts for it.
Yeah. Before I did this new thing, I did a comic book series called Girl Scout Stone Ghost, which I mentioned through Image Comics. The trade paperback just came out of that for that about 2 months ago, so people can still score that at their local comic shop. I went from that immediately into this gig with this company called Zestworld. So Zestworld.com is doing exclusive original online comics, and they signed me, Jimmy Palmiotti, Amanda Connor, Joelle Jones, Eric Canetti, Phil Jimenez, and some other really talented people. And basically what we're doing is for a year, we're creating exclusive online content for them. So if you go to Zestworld.com, you can subscribe. There's 3 different subscription tiers. There's a free tier, and then a monthly tier, and then a year-long tier. And it's basically like having a Patreon, man, where I'm doing weekly newsletters and weekly updates. So I'm doing new comics, and then after I do the new Girl Scouts comic, the next week I show all the behind the scenes making of that comic, including the script, the pencils, the inks, the breakdowns, the layouts. So it's new comics from me, but it's also like my own little art school in a way where I'm like, I'm also going to show you how I'm making all of this shit. So it's a cool, fun way to connect with my fans and also give them a bit more than just the finished product. So and Zestworld's been great. I mean, they just literally let me write and draw whatever I want. So I'm dealing with this fun creator own world of Girl Scouts that I have, and I also keep the publishing rights. So at the end of all this, I get to do a print version of all this material wherever I want to. I can do it through Image. I can crowdfund it. So for me, it's a win-win situation because I'm getting paid to make creator-owned comics, and I get to publish the material after the fact. So they've been really great to deal with, and yeah, they've got some really talented people. I'm in good company. Like I'm a fan of everyone else at the label, so it works out really well. So, and then one other thing I'll pimp real quick, if you don't mind, is there's a new publisher called Whatnot Publishing, and I'm doing variant covers for their line of books. So they're doing this book with Wesley Snipes called Exiled, and a book called Ninja Funk. What else? Alpha Betas and Quested. So I just finished I was going to grab it to show you, but I legally probably can't show you, but it's right over here. But I just finished my Wesley Snipes cover today, and they're debuting, I think, their first title, Alpha Betas, at New York Comic Con this October. So anyway, shameless plug for those guys because they're treating me right, and I'm doing covers for them and having a really good time with it. So
definitely, I've been seeing that Wesley Snipes book everywhere. They've been advertising the hell out of that book, and I can't blame them. You got Wesley Snipes, like you got Blade.
I know, man. I felt like this extra pressure with doing the cover, where I was like, I'm assuming Wesley Snipes is going to see this, so like I want him to say "Holy shit" when he sees my art, even if he doesn't know who I am. I'm trying to, make him specifically happy when he sees the cover. So hopefully I made him all like buff and badass looking. So, but yeah, man, I'm having fun, keeping super busy, and, things are rocking and rolling.
So I guess real quick with Zestworld, it sounds to me like this is kind of a Substack alternative.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be correct? Is this like a comic book specific Substack or?
Yes.
Like, okay.
That's a good way of putting it. And they're also doing a couple little things to separate themselves from everyone else. They're also the first company like this to offer exclusive digital commissions. So basically NFT style commissions where anyone in the world can order a commission through any of the Zestworld artists. And instead of shipping original art, if you're an NFT collector, if you're interested in that space, you can commission any of us to do a piece for you. So they're trying like really new and interesting things. And I feel like the rest of the world, it's going to take a minute to catch up with what everything Zestworld is doing. But I feel like they're laying down this blueprint for the future of how things are going. Because whether people like it or not, like digital content is here to stay, and NFTs are here to stay. I know the comic book world hasn't fully like embraced them, but I'm friends with lots of people outside of comics that deal with the fine art world, the gallery world, the lowbrow, like juxtaposed magazine type world. And dude, so many people are doing NFTs and making money off of it. And so as an artist, as a freelancer, my goal is to always pursue every possible avenue I can to put my work in and to survive and make money. It's only obvious to say that and explore that. So yeah. I'm not cutting myself off to any of these options. And it was cool because when Zestworld came around to talk to me, I liked the fact that they were presenting these new ideas. And they were innovative enough to be like, of course we all love comics on paper. Of course we all love going to the comic shop, digging through the bins. But what about the kid in another country who can't find your print comic? What about this guy across the world who can't get your commission because of shipping and rates and all this bullshit, whatever. So they're kind of like, covering all the ground of options for people. So it's been interesting and a positive experience collaborating with them.
Yeah, I've said this the chagrin of some people. Like NFTs aren't bad; they're neutral. It's what you do with them that's bad or good. And there's some people doing what I believe are bad things with them, but there's still a lot of potential in there for especially independent creators like yourself to do things positive with it. And I choose to focus on those positive things with NFTs because there's all the negative outlets out there. Go to them if you want to hear about the negative.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, it's weird because there's like the good and bad and everything, and even going to conventions again, like comic book shows. It's like you see, or I see, because I've been in it for like over 20 years. I see people that I'm like, this is sort of the wrong direction for what the industry needs, or I won't name names or whatever, but it's like there's certain people that have it right, and there's certain people that are like missing the mark, but the people that miss the mark, they usually don't last very long.
Yeah, correct.
So
I guess, first, thanks so much for being here. This is an awesome conversation, but before we take off, why don't you pimp out the Zestworld and all your socials, let everyone know where they can follow you moving forward.
Oh, sure. Zestworld.com for my brand new creator-owned Girl Scouts comics. And all my social media is at Jim Mahfood, Instagram, Twitter, and jimmahfood.com if you want to order mini comics, prints, pins, self-published comics directly from me. They all come signed, and I think that's about it. Oh, and also I'll say I'll be at New York Comic-Con in Artist Alley this October. So if you're on the East Coast, cruise by, say hello.
Awesome. And everyone out there, make sure to check the show notes down below. I'll have links to Jim's website, the Zestworld, and all of that, so you can continue to follow his work. And as always with these creators, if you have a local comic shop and you look up Jim and you say, hey, Girl Scouts looks cool, ask your local comic shop to buy it before you go anywhere else. It's the best place to get your comics. So, Jim, thanks so much once again. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day for this, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Christopher.